The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Over 400 different alien species filled the massive room, their bodies pressed together in seats made of crystal and light. Some had scales, others had fur, and many had shapes that human eyes could barely understand. They had all come to this place called Station Calvoria to witness something that had been building for centuries. At the center of the room stood 3 humans. They looked very small compared to the massive aliens around them. Ambassador Linda Morrison stood in front, her gray hair tied back in a simple knot. She was 62 years old and had spent the last 8 years of her life trying to convince the galaxy that humans deserved a place among the stars. Behind her stood Danny Orozco, her young assistant, who was barely 30, and Pete Lawson, their security chief, whose face showed the marks of 100 difficult missions. High Arbiter. Velcross raised his ceremonial staff. He was an insectoid creature, tall and thin, with clicking mandibles and eyes that reflected light like broken mirrors. His species had created the Galactic Council 12,000 years ago, long before humans had learned to make fire. "The vote has been counted," Velcross announced. His real voice was a series of clicks and hisses, but the translator machines made his words clear to everyone. 387 civilizations have voted yes. 42 have voted no. 11 have chosen not to vote. Linda Morrison did not move. She had known this was coming for weeks. Resolution 7291 passes, Velcross continued. Humanity is hereby exiled from all Galactic Council space. All trade agreements are canceled. All travel permissions are removed. All diplomatic protections are ended. You have 90 standard cycles to remove every human from Council territory. The chamber erupted with sounds. Some aliens were cheering. Others were sighing with relief. The Vel-3 delegation, its colony world had been accidentally destroyed by a human mining company's engine test, were crying with happiness. The Crescent Collective, who blamed humans for a disease that had killed millions of their people after human tourists visited their planet, were clicking their approval. Linda turned to look at them all. These were the species she had spent years trying to befriend. She had learned their languages, studied their customs, and tried so hard to show them that humans meant no harm. And in the end, none of it had mattered. Ambassador Morrison Velcross said, "Do you have anything to say on behalf of your species?" Linda thought about all the speeches she had prepared, all the arguments she had practiced, all the evidence she had gathered to prove that the accidents were not intentional, that humans were not the monsters the galaxy believed them to be. "No," she said simply. "I think the Council has made its position very clear." She turned and began walking toward the exit. Danny hurried after her, his face pale with shock. "Ambassador, we can't just leave," he whispered. "We have 90 days. We can appeal. We can negotiate. There must be something we can do." Linda did not stop walking. "There is something we can do, Danny. We can go home. But everything we worked for, all those years of diplomacy, all the relationships we built, ... Linda finally stopped. She looked at her young assistant with eyes that held neither anger nor sadness. Instead, there was something else there. Something that looked almost like relief. "Danny, let me tell you something about those relationships. In 300 years of contact with the galaxy, we have been treated like animals in a zoo. We accepted trade deals that kept us poor while making them rich. We allowed our ships to be searched at every checkpoint while their ships flew freely through our space. We watched our people die from diseases they could cure in an hour, but refused to share the medicine for." She began walking again, and we smiled. We said, "Thank you." We begged for scraps at their table and pretended we were grateful. They reached the exit of the chamber. 2 alien guards stepped aside to let them pass. Linda noticed that they would not even look at her. "The galaxy has been afraid of us since the day we made first contact," Linda said. "Do you know why? Not because we threatened them. Not because we attacked them. They were afraid because we reminded them of themselves. We were ambitious. We were hungry. We refused to accept our place at the bottom of their order." They walked through the corridors of Station Calvoria. Alien merchants closed their shops as they approached. Alien children were pulled away by their parents. Everywhere they went, the message was the same. You are not welcome here. You never were. Danny's communication device beeped. Ambassador Geneva is asking for your report. They want to know what happened. Linda took the device from him. Get me a secure line to President Cole. While Danny worked on the connection, Pete Lawson finally spoke. He had been silent throughout the entire council session. You knew this was going to happen, didn't you, ma'am? Linda nodded. I knew it was possible. The signs have been there for years. Too many accidents that were blamed on us. Too many diseases that started after humans visited. Too many convenient excuses to fear us. Some of those accidents were real, Pete said quietly. Some of them were, and we paid for them. We paid with money, with territory, with blood, but it was never going to be enough. They didn't exile us because of what we did, Pete. They exiled us because of what we might become. The communication device crackled to life. President Marcus Cole's voice came through, tired and worried. Linda, I've been watching the feed. It's done then? It's done, sir. 90 days to remove all humans from council space.
Oh.
There was a long pause. How do you feel? Linda looked out a window at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth. Somewhere out there was home. For 3 centuries, humanity had begged for acceptance from species who would never see them as equals. They had crawled when they should have walked. They had whispered when they should have shouted. I feel free, sir, she said finally. For the first time in my life, I feel completely free. The council thinks this is the end of us, President Cole said. They think we'll crawl into a corner and die. Let them think that. Linda smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had been holding back for far too long. Let them think whatever they want. In 90 days, we'll be gone from their precious space. And then we can finally stop pretending. Stop pretending what? Stop pretending that we needed them more than they needed us. Stop pretending that we were the weak ones. Stop pretending that exile is a punishment instead of a gift. She ended the call and handed the device back to Danny. Her young assistant was staring at her with new eyes. As if seeing her for the first time. Ambassador, what are we going to do? Linda Morrison looked at the stars one more time. Out there beyond the reach of the Galactic Council, beyond the borders of their precious protected space, there was an entire universe waiting to be explored. We're going to do what humans have always done, Danny. We're going to survive. We're going to adapt. And someday, when they've forgotten all about us, we're going to come back. She began walking toward their ship, leaving behind 300 years of humiliation with every step. And when we do, the galaxy is going to remember why they were so afraid of us in the first place. The 90 days passed faster than anyone expected. Human ships departed from every corner of council space in long, silent lines. Freighters packed with families and their belongings. Research vessels carrying scientists and their work. Military ships that had once protected human interests now served as escorts for the great. Migration home. The aliens watched them go with a mixture of relief and confusion. They had expected protests. They had expected violence. They had prepared their security forces for riots and resistance. Instead, the humans simply packed their bags, said polite goodbyes to neighbors who had voted to exile them, and left. On Station Kelvoria, a Velthari merchant named Threx watched the last human transport depart from the docking bay. He had sold goods to humans for 20 years. They had always paid on time. They had always been friendly, and yet he had voted for exile because everyone else had. And because it seemed like the safe thing to do now. Watching their ships disappear into the darkness, he felt something strange in his stomach. It might have been guilt, or it might have been fear. Back on Earth, the mood was different. In an underground bunker beneath what used to be called Switzerland, the leaders of humanity's surviving nations gathered around a massive table. President Marcus Cole stood at the head, his dark skin gleaming under the harsh lights. For 300 years, we have been beggars, he said. His voice was calm, but heavy with emotion. We accepted their technology with grateful hands, while they refused to teach us how to build it ourselves. We traded our raw materials for their finished products at prices that kept us in permanent debt. We watched them cure diseases in minutes that killed our children and ours." He looked around the room at generals, scientists, and diplomats. Some were old and tired. Others were young and angry. All of them shared the same burning question in their eyes. What now? "The Galactic Council believed they were punishing us," President Cole continued. "They thought exile would break us. They thought we would wither and die in the darkness of our own solar system." He pressed a button, and a holographic image appeared above the table. It showed a network of secret facilities scattered across Earth, the Moon, Mars, and THE asteroid belt. They were wrong. For 50 years, we have been preparing for this moment. Not because we planned to rebel, but because we knew this day would come. They never trusted us. They never accepted us. And deep down, we always knew that eventually they would show us the door. In a hidden laboratory on the dark side of the moon, Dr. Nina Vasquez stood before a machine that should not have existed. The Galactic Council had declared certain technologies too dangerous for what they called primitive species. Faster than light travel without their licensed gates, energy weapons that could destroy planets, shields that could withstand any known attack. Humans had been forbidden from even researching these technologies. The punishment for violation was immediate destruction of the offending species. But now, there was no council watching. No alien inspectors checking their laboratories. No satellite networks monitoring their every experiment. "Begin the test," Nina said. Her team activated the engine. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fabric of space itself seemed to tear open like a wound, revealing a tunnel of swirling light that led to somewhere else entirely. Nina Vasquez, a woman who had spent her entire career pretending to be less intelligent than she was, finally allowed herself to smile. "Send the message to Geneva," she said. "Tell them it works." Across the solar system, similar messages were being sent. Human engineers had cracked the secrets of technologies that had taken other species millions of years to develop. They had done it in 50 years, working in secret, hiding their progress from the very allies they had once trusted. The Council had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that because humans were young, they were also stupid. They had shared just enough technology to make humanity dependent, but not enough to make them a threat. They had never imagined that humans would learn by watching, by stealing, by taking apart every piece of alien equipment they could get their hands on Earth. Factories that had once produced consumer goods were converted overnight. The same assembly lines that had made televisions and automobiles now produced weapons and starship components. Every human with technical skills was drafted into the effort. Every resource was redirected toward a single goal. Not revenge. Not yet. First came survival. First came strength. In a small apartment in what used to be Tokyo, a young engineer named Kevin Nakamura worked through the night. He had been assigned to improve the efficiency of the new shield generators. His wife Maria brought him coffee and watched him work. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked. Kevin looked up from his calculations. "What do you mean? Building all these weapons? All these warships? Isn't that exactly what they were afraid of? That we would become dangerous?" Kevin thought about this for a long moment. They were afraid of us before we had any weapons. They were afraid of us when we came to them with open hands, asking only to learn and trade. They were afraid of us because we reminded them of themselves, back when they were young and hungry and refused to accept their place in the universe. He returned to his work. They made us dangerous. They had 300 years to treat us as equals, and they chose fear instead. Now they get to live with the consequences. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council celebrated their victory. The Velthari expanded into territories they had long desired. The Crescent Collective announced a new breeding cycle, confident that the human threat had been eliminated. High Arbiter Velcross received awards and honors from a dozen species for his wise handling of the human problem. None of them noticed that Earth had gone dark. The satellites they had, placed in orbit around the human homeworld, reported nothing. No transmissions. No signals. No signs of life. The Council had expected humans to broadcast their desperation. to beg for reconsideration, to send messages of surrender. Instead, there was only silence. Perhaps they destroyed themselves, one council member suggested during a routine meeting. Humans were always emotionally unstable. Perhaps they are simply accepting their fate, another replied. Even animals know when they are beaten. Good riddance either way, a third added, and the room filled with laughter on Earth. In a bunker that the council's satellites could not detect, President Cole watched a screen showing the first human warship to be completed since the exile. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, sleek and beautiful and bristling with weapons that the council believed impossible. What shall we call it? An aide asked. President Cole thought of all the insults humans had endured, all the times they had been called primitive, dangerous, unworthy, all the doors that had been closed in their faces. Call it hope, he said finally, because that's what they tried to take from us. And that's exactly what we're going to give ourselves. The ship's lights came on, one by one, illuminating the darkness of the construction bay. Around it, 100 more ships were being built, and beyond them, 1,000 more were planned. The galaxy had voted to exile humanity. They had expected it to be an ending. They did not understand that for humans it was only the beginning. 5 years passed in the galaxy, and most species forgot that humans had ever existed. The Galactic Council continued its business without interruption. Trade routes flourished. New alliances were formed. Old conflicts were settled. The exile of humanity became a footnote in history books. A warning tale told 2 young species about what happened to those who could not control their primitive impulses. Then the first ship appeared. Border Station Kelvax. Prime was a busy trading hub that marked the edge of Council space. Thousands of ships passed through its sensors every day. The station commander, a Velthari named Kess, had seen vessels from every known civilization. He thought nothing in the universe could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. The ship emerged from empty space without warning. There was no hyperspace gate nearby. There was no known technology that could travel faster than light without using the Council's licensed systems. And yet, there it was, a sleek, silver vessel that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Unknown vessel, identify yourself, Kess demanded over the communication channel. His voice cracked slightly, though he would never admit it. You are in violation of Galactic Council travel regulations. The response came in perfect galactic common, spoken with a tone that Kess could only describe as politely amused. This is the exploration vessel Horizon, representing the Human Republic. We request permission to dock and establish diplomatic contact. Kess felt his exoskeleton go cold. Humans. The word alone sent a chill through his body. He had been a young officer when the exile vote was cast. He remembered the celebrations afterward, the relief that the human threat had been eliminated forever. Humans are exiled from Council space, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. You have no right to be here. Turn back immediately or face consequences. There was a brief pause. Then the human voice returned, still polite, still calm. With respect, Commander, we did not ask for permission to exist. We are simply informing you that we are here. You may grant us docking permission or not. Either way, we will complete our survey and move on. We have no quarrel with you. Not yet. Kess stared at his sensors. The human ship was doing something impossible. It was scanning his entire station, layer by layer, with technology that his systems could not even identify. Within seconds, the humans knew everything about Kelvax Prime, its defenses, its population, its structural weaknesses, and they had done it without even trying to hide what they were doing. This is an act of aggression, Kess said weakly. No, Commander. This is an introduction. The Human Republic sends its greetings to the Galactic Council. We hope that future interactions will be more pleasant than past ones. The ship vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving behind only a fading energy signature that Kess's scientists would spend weeks trying to analyze within hours. Kess's report was transmitted to the Council headquarters. Within days, similar reports were arriving from stations across Council space. Human ships were appearing everywhere, always polite, always calm, always demonstrating technology that should have been impossible. They never attacked first. They never threatened directly. They simply observed, scanned, and departed, leaving behind confused and frightened alien commanders. High Arbiter Velcross convened an emergency session of the Council. The great chamber that had once celebrated humanity's exile was now filled with fear and confusion. "How is this possible?" demanded the Crescent representative. "We monitored Earth for 5 years. There were no transmissions, no signs of development. They should be extinct by now." "They fooled us," Velcross admitted, his old body trembling slightly. "They went silent on purpose. They developed their technology in secret, and we never suspected because we assumed they were incapable of such deception." "What do they want?" asked a Velthari general. "Revenge? Conquest." As if in answer, a holographic message began playing in the center of the chamber. A human face appeared, older now, but instantly recognizable to those who remembered the exile vote. "Greetings to the Galactic Council," said Linda Morrison, now wearing the uniform of an admiral. "I hope this message finds you well. As you may have noticed, the Human Republic has developed certain capabilities that were previously denied to us. We are not here to conquer. We are not here to destroy. We are simply here to take our rightful place among the stars." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You voted to exile us because you were afraid of what we might become. I want to thank you for that. Your fear forced us to become stronger than we ever imagined possible. Your rejection taught us that we could only rely on ourselves. Your cruelty showed us exactly what kind of galaxy we were dealing with." The chamber was absolutely silent. "We bear no grudge against the species who voted against us. We understand that fear is a powerful motivator. But we also want to make something very clear. We will never again ask for permission to exist. We will never again beg for scraps at your table. We will never again accept being treated as second-class citizens of a galaxy that despises us." Admiral Morrison leaned forward, her eyes seeming to stare directly into the soul of every alien watching. "The Human Republic is here to stay. You can choose to work with us as equals, or you can choose to oppose us as enemies. But you cannot choose to ignore us. Not anymore. Not ever again." The message ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then chaos erupted. Some council members demanded immediate military action. Others argued for diplomacy. The Velthari called for evacuation of border worlds. The Crescent suggested surrender. Ancient alliances crumbled as species accused each other of failing to stop the humans while there was still time in the midst of it all. Velcross sat in his chair, feeling the weight of his years pressing down on him. He remembered the exile vote. He remembered how confident everyone had been. He remembered thinking that they were solving a problem forever. Now he understood the terrible truth. They had not solved anything. They had only delayed the inevitable while making it infinitely worse. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, Admiral Linda Morrison stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching reports stream in from across the galaxy. Her ships were everywhere now, a presence that could not be ignored or denied. Danny Orozco, now her chief communications officer, approached with a tablet. "Admiral, the Council has requested a formal meeting. They want to discuss terms." Linda smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Tell them we'll consider their request. After all, we wouldn't want to seem rude." She turned back to the stars. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was finally learning what humanity had always known about itself. They were not animals to be caged. They were not children to be managed. They were not a problem to be solved. They were humans. And they had finally come home. The galaxy had expected war. Every species was preparing for the day when human warships would descend upon their worlds, seeking revenge for 300 years of humiliation. Military budgets exploded. Defense systems were upgraded. Alliance treaties were hastily signed and resigned as civilizations scrambled to protect themselves from the threat they had created. But the attack never came. Instead, something far more confusing happened. Human ships began appearing not with weapons ready, but with cargo holds full of goods. They offered trade deals that were actually fair. They shared technologies that the Council had kept restricted for millennia. They treated every species they encountered with respect and courtesy. Regardless of how that species had voted during the exile, the first civilization to truly understand what humanity had become was, ironically, the Crescent Collective. Crescia Prime was a world of vast underground caverns where the insectoid Crescent people had lived for millions of years. Their most sacred spaces were the breeding chambers, massive structures deep beneath the surface, where nearly 80% of their species' offspring were born and raised. When the earthquakes began, no one understood how bad things would get. The tectonic plates beneath Crescia Prime had been stable for 10,000 years. No one had prepared for what happened when they suddenly shifted. Within days, the breeding chambers began to collapse. Millions of Crescent children were trapped underground, their air supplies running low, their caretakers unable to reach them. The High Matriarch, an ancient female named Desix, who had ruled the collective for 2 centuries, sent desperate pleas for help to the Galactic Council. The response was immediate but discouraging. Relief ships will arrive in 3 to 5 standard cycles, the Council administrator told her. We must coordinate the effort with multiple species to ensure proper protocols are followed. Desix felt her heart break. 3 to 5 cycles. Her children would be dead in 2. Is there no one closer? She begged. Anyone who can help now? The administrator's response was cold and bureaucratic. The nearest non-council vessel is a human ship approximately 4 hours from your position. However, I would strongly advise against requesting their assistance. Humans are unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Desix ended the communication and sat in silence. The Crescent had voted for human exile. They had blamed humans for the plague that had killed so many of their people. Even though later investigation had shown the disease was caused by a natural mutation, they had celebrated when the exile passed, believing themselves finally safe from the human threat. And now humans were the only ones who could save their children. The High Matriarch made the hardest decision of her life. She opened a communication channel to the human ship. Human vessel, this is Crescia Prime. We are experiencing a catastrophic emergency. Our breeding chambers are collapsing. Millions of our children will die without immediate assistance. Her voice broke. We are requesting your help. The response came within seconds. Crescia Prime, this is Captain Henry Park of the Human Republic Vessel Guardian. We received your distress signal. What do you need? We need geological stabilization equipment, Desix said. We need engineers who can reinforce collapsing structures. We need medical supplies for injured survivors. We need... She stopped, unable to continue. We need everything, she finally admitted. And we have nothing to offer in return. There was a brief pause. Then Captain Park's voice returned, warm and steady. High Matriarch, we're not here to negotiate. We're here to help. My ship will arrive in 4 hours. Have your people ready to show us what needs to be done. The Guardian arrived exactly when Captain Park had promised. It was a massive vessel, far larger than anything the Crescent had expected. Within minutes of docking, human engineers were pouring out in environmental suits, carrying equipment that glowed with unfamiliar energy. Captain. Henry Park was a tall man with kind eyes and gray hair at his temples. He met the High Matriarch at the entrance to the main cavern complex and shook her hand in the human fashion. He said simply, what followed would become legend across the galaxy. Human. Engineers worked for 72 hours without rest. They deployed technology that Crescent scientists could not understand but could not deny was effective. Massive generators created fields of energy that held the collapsing rocks in place. Drilling machines cut new passages to trap survivors. Medical teams treated the injured while rescue teams pulled children from the rubble. On the 3rd day, when the last child was finally rescued, Captain Park collapsed from exhaustion. He had not slept since arriving on Crescia Prime. Neither had any of his crew. The Crescian medics tried to help him, but he waved them off. I'm fine, he said weakly. How many did we lose? High Matriarch Thesix knelt beside him, her compound eyes wet with tears that her species rarely showed. 12,000 were trapped. Thanks to you, 11,700 survived. You saved almost all of them. 300 still died, Park said, his voice heavy with grief. I'm sorry we couldn't save them all. Thesix stared at him in disbelief. This human, this member of the species her people had voted to exile, was apologizing for not saving more of her children. He had pushed himself to the point of collapse for strangers who had treated his kind as monsters, and he was sorry that he could not do more. Why? She asked finally. Why did you help us? We voted against you. We blamed you for crimes you did not commit. We celebrated when you were exiled. Why would you risk your lives to save our children? Captain Park looked up at her, and despite his exhaustion, he managed a small smile. Because that's who we are, he said. That's who we've always been. We don't help people because we want something from them. We don't rescue children because of politics or treaties or trade agreements. We help because we can, because it's the right thing to do. He closed his eyes. Your council never understood that about us. They thought we were dangerous because we were different. They never considered that maybe we were different because we actually cared. When the council relief ships finally arrived 3 days later, they found something that shocked them to their core. Human engineers were sharing meals with Cretan workers. Human doctors were teaching Cretan medics new techniques. Human soldiers were playing games with Cretan children who had been pulled from the rubble, the species who had been declared too dangerous to coexist with, were laughing and singing. With the people who had voted to exile them, word spread across the galaxy faster than any official announcement could have. Other species began to question the stories they had been told. If humans were monsters, why had they saved the Cretan children? If they were primitive destroyers, why were they establishing trade routes that benefited everyone equally? If they were dangerous animals, why did they refuse payment for their rescue efforts? The Velthari Empire, which had been the loudest voice calling for exile, faced unexpected consequences. Their outer colonies began to rebel, inspired by the example of humans, who had refused to accept their place at the bottom of the galactic order and in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. High Arbiter Velcross watched his carefully constructed narrative fall apart. For 300 years, Council had maintained its power by controlling who was considered civilized and who was considered dangerous. They had used fear of humanity to justify their own restrictions and regulations. Now that fear was turning into something else. Something that Velcross found far more threatening than anger or revenge. It was turning into admiration. Captain Park and his crew returned to their ship after 2 weeks on Kracia. Prime, the High Matriarch, came to see them off personally, something she had never done for any visitor in her 2 centuries of rule. We were wrong about you, she said, her voice carrying across the docking bay. My people were wrong. I hope someday you can forgive us. Park shook her hand one final time. There's nothing to forgive, High Matriarch. Fear makes people do terrible things. What matters is what we do after we stop being afraid. As the Guardian departed Krecia Prime, Park received a message from Admiral Morrison. Captain, your actions on Krecia Prime have changed everything. Half the galaxy is now questioning the exile vote. Keep doing what you're doing. Park smiled as he watched the stars stretch into lines around his ship. That's the plan, Admiral. That's always been the plan. 10 years had passed since the day the Galactic Council voted to exile humanity from the stars. In that decade, the universe had changed more than it had in the previous 1,000 years. The Council still existed, but its power had faded like a dying star. Species that had once trembled at its commands now questioned its authority. Trade routes that had been controlled by ancient monopolies were now open to everyone. Technologies that had been hoarded by the powerful were now freely shared with any civilization that asked for help. And at the center of all this change stood humanity. The human republic had not conquered anyone. They had not demanded tribute or territory. They had not taken revenge on the species who had voted for their exile. Instead, they had done something that confused the galaxy far more. than any military victory could have. They had simply been themselves. Human. Doctors traveled to worlds where disease had plagued populations for generations, bringing cures that they shared without cost. Human engineers helped build infrastructure on planets that had been neglected by the Council for centuries. Human teachers opened schools where anyone could learn, regardless of their species or status, and everywhere they went, they asked only one thing in return, that the people they helped treat others with the same kindness. On Earth, a new generation was growing up without the weight of exile. Children born after the departure had never known what it meant to be second-class citizens of a galaxy that despised them. They looked up at the stars not with fear or resentment, but with wonder and excitement. In a small park in what used to be called San Francisco, an elderly woman sat on a bench watching children play. Her gray hair was thin now, and her body showed the marks of a long and difficult life. But her eyes were still sharp, still filled with the same fire that had burned in them on the day she walked out of the council chamber. Admiral Linda Morrison, retired now but never forgotten, smiled as she watched a human child teaching an alien visitor how to throw a ball. Danny Orozco sat beside her, his own hair white now, his face lined with age. He had served with her for 40 years, from the darkest days of exile to the brightest days of triumph. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if they hadn't voted to exile us?" he asked. Linda considered the question for a long moment. It was one she had been asked many times over the years by journalists and historians and curious children. Her answer had evolved as she had grown older and perhaps wiser. "We would have stayed," she said finally. "We would have kept accepting their scraps, kept begging for their approval, kept pretending that being allowed to exist in their shadow was the same as being truly alive. And now—" Linda looked up at the sky, where a human starship was cruising silently overhead, its hull gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Now we're building things they never imagined. Not to prove anything to them, not to get revenge. Just because it's who we are. We're explorers, creators, dreamers. We refuse to accept limits, even the ones others try to put on us." A young girl ran up to the bench, breathless with excitement. She was perhaps 8 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes that reminded Linda of herself at that age. "Admiral Morrison. Admiral Morrison, is it true that you were there when they voted to exile us? Is it true that you walked out of the council chamber without saying anything?" Linda laughed, a sound that still carried strength, despite her years. "I said one word, actually. They asked if I had anything to say, and I said no." "Why?" the girl asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Because sometimes the best response to cruelty is dignity. They expected me to beg. They expected me to cry. They expected me to confirm every terrible thing they believed about humans. Instead, I walked out with my head held high, and it confused them more than any argument could have." The girl thought about this for a moment. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Linda admitted. "But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway." The girl nodded seriously, as if storing this wisdom away for future use. Then she ran off to rejoin her friends, leaving Linda and Danny alone again, on the former council station of Calvoria. Where the exile vote had been cast a decade earlier, a ceremony was taking place. The great chamber that had once been filled with species celebrating humanity's banishment was now decorated with flags from 100 worlds. High Arbiter Velcross, ancient and frail but still alive, stood at the podium where he had once announced the exile. This time, he was reading a very different document. "On behalf of the Galactic Council," he said, his voice thin but steady, "I hereby acknowledge that Resolution 7291 was a mistake. We acted out of fear, not wisdom. We punished an entire species for crimes that were, in many cases, not crimes at all." He paused, gathering his strength. "We offer no excuses. We ask no forgiveness. We simply state for the record of history that we were wrong. Humanity did not deserve exile. They deserved what every species deserves, the chance to prove themselves on their own terms." Captain Henry Park, now an admiral himself, sat beside High Matriarch Thesix of the Krishon Collective. They had become unlikely friends over the years, their bond forged in the rubble of the breeding chambers he had helped save. "Does it change anything?" This X asked quietly. "This apology?" Park shook his head. "Not really. We stopped needing their approval a long time ago. But it matters that they're willing to admit they were wrong. That's the first step toward real change." After the ceremony, a new plaque was unveiled in the chamber. It bore a simple inscription in Galactic Common. Humanity was asked to leave. They did not hesitate. They also did not forget how to come back. May this serve as a reminder that exile is not the same as erasure, and that the measure of a species is not in how they beg for acceptance, but in how they rise when rejected. Back on Earth, as the sun set over San Francisco, Linda Morrison stood up slowly from her bench. Danny offered his arm, and she took it gratefully. "Where to now?" he asked. Linda looked at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, human ships were exploring galaxies that had never been touched by any known civilization. Somewhere up there, human scientists were discovering things that would reshape the understanding of the universe. Somewhere up there, the children of Earth were building a future that no one could have imagined on that terrible day when the galaxy had tried to throw them away. She said simply, "I think I'd like to go home." As they walked slowly through the park, a young boy ran past them, chasing a glowing ball that drifted through the air on currents of gravity that human technology had learned to control. He was laughing, pure and joyful. Without any of the weight that Linda's generation had carried, that was the real victory, she realized. Not the technology. Not the recognition. Not even the apology from the council. The real victory was that boy, laughing without fear, dreaming without limits, looking at the stars and seeing only possibilities. The galaxy had voted to exile Earth. They had expected humanity to wither and die in the darkness. Instead, humans had built their own light, and in the end, it was not revenge that defined them. It was not anger or bitterness or the desire to prove everyone wrong. It was something the council had never understood and could never measure. The stubborn, relentless, beautiful human refusal to give up. The stars had never looked brighter, and the best was yet to come. Linda Morrison looked up one last time at the universe that had tried so hard to reject her species. Then she smiled, squeezed Danny's arm, and walked toward the lights of home behind her. The stars continued their eternal dance, witnesses to the rise of a species that had refused to accept the verdict of a galaxy that had never really known them at all. Humanity had been exiled. Humanity had returned. And now, finally, humanity was free.